Great.
Hey everybody, just wanted to welcome you to our Friday Lunch and Learn. I'm Jen Walling, the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council, and I am so excited about today's Lunch and Learn to talk about energy affordability and the crisis that's going on with affordability for electricity and heat. We have some excellent presenters today, just some people I admire a whole lot, which is Karen Lesson, who is a senior attorney at the National Consumer Law Center and has a really long background in working for Illinois government. So that's great. So thanks, Karen. And Naomi Davis, who's the founder and CEO of Blacks and Green and Green Power Alliance. For those of you who were joining today to get the CLE, I'm going to put a link into the chat for where you will put your ARDC number. If you can't access it for some reason, you can always email me or the IEC email address. I'll put my email in there too. So I'll put that in there in just a second. But thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to pitch it over to Karen and Naomi. Oh, and if you have any questions, I think let's save them for the end, Naomi and Karen, or you can put them in the chat and we'll cover them at the end, and I'll moderate the questions. That sounds good. Great. So put questions in the chat, or at the end we'll ask for some questions. So I'm going to put the CLE link in there. Let me know if anybody has any issues, but go ahead, Naomi.
Greetings, cousins. You all know I love to greet you that way. We're all in this together, and we're very excited, Karen and I and the Campaign to End Energy Poverty, to thank IEC for their support of this bill, and to thank you for joining us today to learn more about affordability and how we can advance that. Next slide. There we go. So just to say a little bit about, oh, how exciting. Okay. Blacks and Green, a lot of you know us, a lot of you don't. We are the authors of the 8 Principles of Green Village Building. We're a national network. We are located on the Mid-South Side by the Obama Presidential Center, which is emerging. And we are the authors of the 8 Principles of Green Village Building, all about how can you create a walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, walk to play village where African Americans own the businesses, own the land, and live the conservation lifestyle, which we call the beautiful life. Our lobbying affiliate, Green Power Alliance, is our 501c4 in the issues of legislation. We are pushing with an alliance of folks that have been meeting with us for over a year now, and looking forward to growing that group with some of you today. Next slide. Karen.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, you go, Karen.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here, and thanks to Jen Walling for hosting us. Just a little bit about the National Consumer Law Center where I work. It's been around since 1969. In NCLC, we use expertise in consumer law and energy policy work. It was to fight for consumer justice and economic security for low-income and other disadvantaged people in the U.S. And these are the services that are provided by NCLC, just so you understand a little bit about NCLC. I manage a project called Project Stay Connected Illinois. I'm based here in Illinois and have worked for many years on affordability issues prior to NCLC at the Illinois Attorney General's Office and the Public Utilities Bureau there. And now at NCLC with a special focus on low-income affordability issues. Oops.
I want to just say that the Campaign to End Energy Poverty was born January of 2022, designed to really tackle strategies that would bring us more closely in alignment with the national standard of 6% of household income paid to heat and light. And we are building that campaign through next slide, through the idea that there can be an actual end of energy poverty. We had a retreat last July where we brought together 100 folks from across the country, from across the state, from across the city, to begin to really unpack what the key issues were in the energy industry, because we were noticing very clear, well-documented harms that were persisting. And so to be able to say enough is enough and to move ahead with some concrete solutions, we began meeting weekly. We're still meeting weekly. The Green Power Alliance meets every Monday night from 6 to 8. And in this context, created the legislation that we're going to be talking to you about today. Next slide. The idea here is let's just do what works. We're understanding that the colleagues that we share at the utilities have many good programs that have been running for many years. And of course, we applaud their work to engage communities of color. And we understand that a lot of those programs are doing a lot of good in key places. But the thing that they are not doing, and this is the thing I want you to carry through as we walk through the rest of these slides, is they are not reducing the arrearages and the disconnections associated with people not being able to afford their heat and light. This is obviously publicly available data. We all understand we want to work more closely with the Illinois Commerce Commission. Those of you here with us today should probably just begin to get a little bit more familiar with the ICC website. But millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, folks, hundreds of millions of dollars are regularly reported as arrearages with that customers have on their bills, and deferred payment plans are not retiring this debt. So what we're going to be able to do today is walk you step by step through how the problem is documented and the solutions, which we think are very sensible, surgical, and really the right thing to do. Next slide. So it probably goes without saying, but because we are teetering around the cliff of the end of the winter moratorium, we're just going to be emphasizing this point. When people cannot pay the utility bills, and we learned this during COVID, they can't work, their children can't go to school. That idea of sheltering safely in your homes, that's a concept, does not pan out in reality. And as the business model is currently structured with our investor-owned utilities, right now they're incentivized under our Public Utilities Act to essentially punish those who can't afford this life essential service. And we've got a very, very, we think, smart and simple way to flip that script and begin to incentivize our utilities to work more closely with specific programs and capacities to keep people connected. Next slide. So you should understand, I mean, fundamentally, we either believe people are not able to afford their utility bills, or we think, well, maybe they're just gaming the system. And we want to we want to tackle that myth that $400 million in arrearages can be the result of people getting on their phones with utilities and working out some kind of scam. It really flies in the face of what we know are the root causes. The rates are rising much faster than anybody's incomes. We know for a fact that, especially in our Black and Brown communities, that we're in deferred maintenance properties. We are not able to enjoy some of the programs that would lower our bills because we have envelopes that are drafty, roofs that are substandard, junction boxes, all of these things that make a leaky envelope that make us ineligible for these great programs. And we also know, and this is fundamental to the work that we're doing here, is that there must be balanced access at the ICC. Balance, balance, balance. And right now, there's an outsized voice of the utilities and a way underrepresentation of customers of any kind, but especially our low and moderate income families. And so having a voice in these places, which hasn't helped, has not existed, would be a great help. And that's part of what we're proposing. Next slide. So right now, I'm going to pass the ball to Karen, and she's going to begin to dig down into what we know about the uncollectibles, about the affordability, and about balanced access. Karen?
Okay, so what is interesting to know and disturbing to know is that utilities technically are now incentivized to disconnect customers and assess costly late fees. Why? Because there are two provisions within the Public Utilities Act, one for the electric side and one for the gas side, that require the utilities, if they want to recover their bad debt through what's called a reconciliation rider, which is just another way of describing a surcharge on our bill, they must provide evidence to the commission of, quote unquote, reasonable and prudent efforts to minimize and collect bad debt. And so specifically in these statutes, the utilities are required to show that they issue late fees, they issue disconnection notices, and disconnect customers as a means of, in the Act's view, of minimizing bad debt. But we think that sends the wrong signal to the utilities, and that sort of punitive paradigm needs to be flipped. And so essentially, what is fair? Let's move away from this punitive approach of utility revenue collection that absolutely punishes people for being poor, to one that prioritizes customer health and safety. Again, doesn't punish people for their financial condition, and doesn't ignore the roots and realities of the racial wealth gap. How did we get here? How did that racial wealth gap come to exist? And is that reality incorporated into an approach of revenue collection that, again, seems to ignore all those factors and punish people, again, because of their income and their
And I want to just jump in here and say quickly, Karen, that we know that entrepreneurs all from one end of the country to the other work really hard to get their customers and keep their customers, and there's a certain standard that we all understand in the realm of customer service. We know when we're being served, we know when we're not. And by virtue of the franchise monopoly, to have a territory with this guaranteed customer base, we don't think has been a sort of a business model that promotes real deep tissue customer care. Now, we're not trying to change everything, but we are trying to change just the way that if utilities would treat their customers in a way that really takes full acknowledgement that they do owe them a duty to serve. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's a life essential service. There's a duty to serve. Disconnections not only harm people's livelihoods, but their lives, and loss of life is also associated. So let's get real about the impacts and just sort of the unnecessary punitive model that we're working with right now. Back to you.
So from a national level, in terms of unaffordability and energy insecurity, the U.S. Energy Information Administration periodically publishes information based on surveys of energy burdens and unaffordability. And we know that nearly 1 in 3 households face challenges in paying their energy bills or keeping their homes heated or cooled. We know that 25 million households report foregoing food and medicine to pay energy bills in many months of the year. And we know that this energy unaffordability is not the same for all populations. What's been identified by the EIA is that 52% of Black households reported experiencing household insecurity, as well as 44% of Latin households. So unaffordability is not an equal opportunity punishment, shall we say. Wanted to give you some numbers related to unaffordability here in Illinois, because that's what's important to us for advocates here in Illinois. So what has happened to delivery service rates over the last 10 years? ComEd, as you can see here, have their rates through that formula rate era have increased more than 48% since 2012. Ameren's rates have increased nearly 40% over the same period. Around a third of people's gas customers are typically eligible for disconnection at any given time during the year because rates are so unaffordable. And how do we know that? We know that from the quarterly reports that People's Gas files with the ICC as a result of an investigation case related to its system modernization project. So on a quarterly basis, People's Gas reports on the progress of that infrastructure project, whether mains are being replaced, what percentage of vulnerable mains are being replaced. But there's also information about the impact that the project has had on rates. And these reports detail the percentage of customers or the numbers of customers that are eligible for disconnection at any given time. And then NICOR gas rates, we know that NICOR has filed several rate cases within the last 5 years. And as a result, rates have increased 288% since 2018. And the hits just keep on coming, because today every major electric and gas utility has unprecedented rate increase requests pending before the ICC that we know will increase monthly bills. Those cases will be resolved by the Commission for the gas utilities at the end of this year, and on January 1st, 2024 for the electric utilities. So right now, all the 4 major companies all filed for rate increases during the month of January. As long back as I can remember, that's never happened before. So you can imagine the burden on consumer advocates like the Attorney General's office and others to try and manage all of these cases and litigate all of these cases at the same time. It's not easy. This is chart that I pulled from the CUB website. It's a handy chart that kind of gives you the impact of each of the rate hike requests and the estimated average monthly impact on customer bills that we can expect if these increases are granted. And these were average impacts calculated by the utilities themselves. So you can see that ComEd in their 4-year performance-based rate-making plan that was filed in January is seeking a $1.47 billion rate increase to take effect over a 4-year period. $435.5 million for Ameren, $402 million a year for Peoples Gas. That's a new record. Nicor Gas, $321 million. I believe Nicor has never filed for that much either in a single case. Ameren Gas, 160.4, and then North Shore, 18.5 million a year. And you can see the monthly impacts on rates for each of these cases. And when you think about monthly bills and where the money comes from, it's the same pocketbook or the same wallet that's paying for both electric and gas. So added together, this results in, hundreds of dollars over the year in increases, and that's just the delivery side of the bill. We're not talking about the energy supply rates that constitute about 50% of our monthly bills. And of course, we've all noticed the impact of those increased gas prices over the last 2 winters. They are starting to come down now a bit. And then certainly in central and southern Illinois, the electric rates that have plagued customers there. So customers are being really hit from both ends of the bill.
And Karen, just want to jump in here and say that anyone who's looking at those increases per month and saying, well, that doesn't seem so bad. I want you to understand why this phenomenon called the racial wealth gap is called a gap. It's because many of us in Illinois enjoy an income that is far greater. And when you talk about the Black-white racial wealth gap, there is a well-documented 10-to-1 ratio. And if you think about that in real terms, or you want to try to wrap your mind around what does that actually mean? Well, take your assets and divide them by 10 and see what your world might be like with you, trying to meet these rates, which do not take into account what your income is, whether you're a millionaire or whether you are paycheck to paycheck, you're paying the same rates. Karen?
Yeah, excellent point. For someone on a very strict or limited or capped income, these increases have a dire impact on monthly budgets. Happening at the same time as these rate increase requests is the extreme shortage of LIHEAP funding that we are experiencing in the state. Why? Because there's been a 30% increase in LIHEAP applications since the 2023 LIHEAP fiscal year began back in September. So of course, more people are seeing significantly increased bills. More people are trying to access LIHEAP funding. And of course, when the bills are higher, the funds that are available don't go as far. I should note too that because of this increased desire to apply for LIHEAP and need to apply for LIHEAP, that DCO had to make the difficult decision to close the percentage of income payment plan program, otherwise known as the PIP, back in September to any new enrollees. So essentially that program is capped at the existing number of persons on it. We'll see what happens next year. But DCO predicts this spring, beginning next week, when the winter moratorium is lifted, that it will be running out of funds beginning April and certainly by the end of May at all agencies. That's a frightening statistic, particularly when you consider that the LIHEAP program isn't available during the summer months at present.
We all know extreme heat is a real thing and taking its toll. We don't have to go all the way back to the 1995 crisis, the tragedy of 736 deaths in Chicago associated with heat and the unavailability of cooling during high temperatures. And we know that climate crisis is going to continue to accelerate, and especially with the heat index, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. These temperatures have a physiological impact that we must take into account if we're going to honor the health and safety duty to franchise customers. Karen?
So today, what do we know about how well or not so well our credit and collections protections, that is the minimum standards that the utilities have to live by per ICC rule? How are they working? The answer is not so well for thousands and thousands of customers across the state. Even before COVID hit, disconnections of ComEd customers had increased by 170% over the 2013 to 2019 time period. Amerins had increased by 79%. And the monthly data too, importantly, reports that deferred payment arrangements just aren't giving people the flexibility they need to try and continue to make monthly payments that keep them connected and to wipe out existing arrearages. So each month when we go to the credit and collections dashboard on the ICC's website, we can see the very high default rates of deferred payment arrangements for the big four utilities. And these figures represent the numbers that were reported just last month. And if you think about it, of course, deferred
Because
payment.
wait a minute, because Karen, just imagine you have a bill that's unaffordable and now you have a payment plan that requires you to pay that plus extra. Who thinks that makes a whole bunch of sense? Karen?
Right. And also for the deferred payment arrangements, low income customers, and those customers are defined as customers who are on LIHEAP or PIP, are required to put a 20% down payment on as part of setting up that deferred payment, and 25% if you're a non-low income customer. So there again, it's trying to scrape together a down payment on a deferred payment arrangement that, again, is, as Naomi has pointed out, on a bill that is already unaffordable. So we believe that the structure and format and terms of deferred payment arrangements as they exist today just don't work. Again, we know too from the monthly zip code level data filed with the ICC that communities of color have been hit hardest by utility disconnection policies and arrearage levels. And for anyone who hasn't gone on the ICC's website to this credit and collections dashboard, it's really an excellent source of information. It's been laid out and formatted in a way that's quite readable. And also, if you click on certain boxes, like you want to focus in on arrearage levels, for example, maps of that service territory for the utility that you're interested in examining pop up, and you can see listed there the zip codes, the top 20 or so zip codes that have the highest, whether it be a percentage of disconnection notices or late fees, or the highest arrearage numbers. It's all there in this dashboard. So Illinois has it. Illinois, in that regard, is a leader, at least across the country, in being transparent about what's happening with credit and collections. And that change was a provision in the CEJA law that was adopted in 2021, which essentially codified that which the utilities agreed to begin doing as a settlement during the COVID era. And another disturbing factor when you learn more about the credit and collections process is that there is a great deal of discretion provided to the utilities in the decision of who and when to disconnect customers. For example, each utility sets what would be called the disconnection trigger, arrearage trigger amount. It could be $300, it could be $150, it could be $1,000. We know, for example, during COVID, when we had monthly meetings with the utilities to talk about these issues, for example, Peoples Gas's arrearage trigger amount was significantly higher than the other utilities. And in my view, that the reason for that was because if they lowered it to a level that the other utilities used, that, fully perhaps a third of Chicago might be disconnected. So I think the utilities look at that kind of information in setting those arrearage trigger amounts, but certainly it's something within their discretion. The second issue that was surprising, shall we say, was that the utilities have a policy of accelerating disconnections for customers they deem to be financially at risk. And how do they do that? Through a process called risk ranking. And in risk ranking, the utilities, most of the utilities, 3 of the 4 big utilities, use a third-party contractor. They provide information on each of us in terms of our bill payment history, how long we've been a customer, which presumably puts customers who are renting apartments at an accelerated risk of having what's deemed a higher financial risk ranking. And they send that information to the third-party contractor. Weightings are applied. A black box algorithm is used. And each of us is then assigned a number that can be revised depending on what's happening with what our payment history. When you think about that policy makes no sense whatsoever, because if you're accelerating people with the highest, who are considered by the utility to be most at risk for non-payment, you're not giving them the time they need to access needed energy assistance like LIHEAP. It absolutely makes no sense. It's inefficient. It's in our view, discriminatory. There's a provision in the Public Utilities Act that essentially says that utilities cannot treat customers within the same service class, which in this case would be the residential class, differently. And that's exactly what's happening here. Disconnections occur even after the utilities have been notified by Community Action Agency that a customer is in the process of applying for LIHEAP. So a ping is sent to the utility by a Community Action Agency when someone walks in to apply for LIHEAP to verify that individual is a customer. And at that point, the utility knows that this person is applying for LIHEAP. What doesn't happen is, for most of the utilities, is a communications to the credit and collections department to put a hold on any sort of disconnection activity, to give the person time and to give the Community Action Agency time to process those applications. Again, who most frequently bears the hammer of disconnection? Again, zip code data reveal that Black and brown and environmental justice communities are disproportionately impacted. How do we know this? So again, the transparency that's been provided by the new zip code level data allows analysis. And Tufts University did an analysis of zip code level disconnection data, looking at the years 2013 through 2020. Controlling for income distribution and other demographics. The economist who conducted the study concluded that customers in non-white neighborhoods were 4 to 5 times more likely to have their power disconnected, both in normal times and during the pandemic. There was a 9-fold expansion observed in low-income assistance to pay utility bills, but disconnections were double and deferred payment plans triple their historic averages in October of 2020. About 20% of accounts were charged late fees. And the odds for each of these measures, importantly, were multiples higher in non-white zip codes.
And I want to just jump in and say, there's a lot of deep data that we're going through, and we're going through it for a reason, that people are not understanding that unaffordability is real. When we're living in a data-driven society, we're looking now to solve for unaffordability that's well established. And yes, we're getting to the part where we're getting ready to talk about the solutions. Hang in there. We are going to, in the next couple of slides, begin breaking down what it is we know that we can do. And by the way, in this legislative session, which ends May 19th, because with the moratorium on winter shutoffs ending today, and with what we can surely expect in disconnections coming in a new wave of household trauma, we are focused on solutions. We are focused on solutions. You're going to hear some of our best thinking, but keep this in mind as you're listening. Keep this in mind as you're listening. How can those of us who are sitting at the table working on this legislation work together? You got spring break coming up. We can get together. We can crunch these solutions out. We can reach alignment, and we can pass a bill this session with some very concrete measures to help real families deserving help after such an epoch of discrimination. Karen, why don't we move and get the solutions?
Okay, and yeah, this is just another case study. I won't go into the details. You can see the conclusions in the slide. This information was presented in ComEd's performance-based rate making metric setting case last year. But you can see there that all 20 of the zip codes with the highest disconnection rate fell within the state's definition of equity investment communities. This is just a visual of what that looked like, and with the yellow representing non-white communities. Again, this is just a summary of the risk ranking. I've told you about that. And we know that this is not just a phenomenon happening in Illinois, but likely employed by utilities throughout the US by using this third-party contractor. So what are the changes needed? Again, it's worth repeating, to be financially struggling is not a character flaw. So why are we imposing the hammer of disconnection? We know again that Black and brown environmental justice communities are disproportionately impacted, and disconnection as a policy assumes that we all had equivalent opportunity to accumulate wealth across the generations, ignores the root causes of poverty, racism, decades of disinvestment. Vulnerable populations have always been paying for renewable energy and nuclear subsidies that benefit Exelon and wealthier ratepayers who can afford the switch to renewables. So when pushback comes from, why should we, for example, subsidize discount rates? Well, there's the vulnerable populations that are in all of the utility service territories are financing a lot of these subsidies as well and not enjoying the benefits of them.
And I must underscore that point, because a constant refrain that we hear is, well, how shall others pay for this bad debt? Because we want you to clearly understand the utilities are not paying for this bad debt. They are not at risk and they're not losing revenues. Those are statutorily guaranteed. And so when we say, well, who's going to pay for it? Let's let the goose and the gander have the same standard. Karen has just said in a sentence what there's tons of documentation for, which is that lower income, moderate income families who cannot enjoy a spectrum of services that they pay for every month on their bill are essentially subsidizing wealthier utility customers. And there hasn't been a cry of complaint about that. Now we're looking to balance the playing field here. We're looking to do what's fair. Karen?
So this is just a summary of the revisions that we think are needed and that have been incorporated in the People's Utility Rate Relief Act, House Bill 2172. So we want to, first of all, put an end to these punitive credit and collections practices and discriminatory risk ranking, provide what one individual aptly called, I think, the bookend of life protections to financially vulnerable customers. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And incorporate a heat index, as Naomi already referenced. And that's also being incorporated in a bill put forth by the Attorney General's office that is moving through the House Bill 1541. Improve medical certification rules that currently just don't work. Provide robust discount rates for eligible low-income customers. And again, no disconnections of customers waiting to hear on their LIHEAP applications. So the People's Utility...
These solutions are sensible, surgical, and the right thing to do. Sorry for my little peppering the commercial aspect of this whole thing, but that's my constant refrain. Keep going, Karen.
Yeah. So we've sort of taken a two-prong approach to improving affordability and access to ICC decision-making, because as Naomi has referenced earlier, right now, there isn't really a balanced, in our view, level of participation and access to the ICC in ICC proceedings. So the bill would require from that regulatory ICC end of the spectrum that the commission incorporate a specific assessment of affordability in regulatory actions. So when a rate case comes before them, they have to actually look at evidence to determine, hey, is this rate increase actually affordable to our lowest income customers? Improve transparency in ICC annual reports so that the information provided to the public and the General Assembly actually describes what's happening with rates, what's happening with utility profits. And so it's just easier to access and understand what's happening to energy affordability or unaffordability in the state. And then again, this would also require the ICC in a proceeding that it initiates to assess the current credit and collections zip code level reports to remedy any disproportionate impacts on certain communities. And then, oh, I've got that twice. It would also revise the existing intervenor compensation statute, which was passed in the CEJA law, to eliminate the requirement that the commission adopt a material recommendation argued by an intervening organization. So if you can only get intervenor compensation if you win before the commission, that's a deterrent to actually getting involved in the case, because who's going to risk pouring out money for legal representation or expert witnesses if in fact they have to win before the commission to get any hope for compensation? And it also
keep in mind, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it also eliminates any required showing of financial needs so that community-based organizations can exercise their right to have a voice at the commission, and other not-for-profits can participate and represent groups and low-income customers.
And so when we are solving for balanced access, we're looking to achieve balanced access. We're looking at what are the hurdles to access and how can we slenderize those, eliminate them, modify them. We want the other customers, other than utilities, those who represent them, to sorry, well, they're not customers, obviously, they're the utilities, but we want the customers, all the full spectrum of customers, to be able to share their voice and be heard, which is not the current reality in a fair way. Keep on going, Karen. These are our solutions.
And on the customer end, the bill would clarify the definition of low-income customer, because right now we're sort of a couple different definitions of low-income customer in utility systems, as well as in the Public Utilities Act. So this would clarify it to include persons whose income falls at or below 80% of the area median income. It would provide qualified financially struggling customers a discounted rate, a commitment that the ICC, by the way, has already recommended to the General Assembly should be happening. And it would provide new protections from disconnection, sort of these bookend of life protections for financially vulnerable customers. So that would include seniors over the age of 65 and households with children under 6 due to inability to pay.
And let me further clarify, this is not opening up the benefits to everyone over 65, everyone with children under 6. These are people who are households, customers who are already financially struggling and certifiable in some ways that we're working together across the table to define. Karen, keep on going.
It would revise disconnection protections for medical conditions that permit renewals tied to a medical professional certification and the length of the condition. This is important too, because today, if people need a medical certificate to prevent disconnection, it's good for 3 months. It can be renewed once, and then it ends. And a person has to wait a full year before it can apply for a medical certification exemption. We think that makes no sense, and certainly doesn't follow the path of illness or disability. Revises the term of deferred payment agreements so that they're more affordable and reasonably structured. And it halts disconnections, again, of pending LIHEAP applications. Again, particularly since we know that more than 90% of the applications that are processed for LIHEAP enrollment are deemed eligible. That's a statistic reported by DCO. Again, it incorporates that humidity heat index, which is really the trigger for heat stroke and even death. It mandates wintertime disconnection moratoriums between December 1st and March 31st, which are voluntary now when the temperature exceeds 32 degrees. We want to make sure it stays that way in statute. And it halts the current practice of accelerating disconnections based on that black box algorithm scoring system. Naomi, I'll let you take this slide.
Yeah, the idea, again, when we are looking for how to practically and tactically affect a system, policy upgrades that produce a more level playing field, a fairer outcome, we want to underscore that, it's no one's running around trying to do deep tissue analysis of the numbers. Most of us in the households are not doing that. We understand that we're burdened, that we're overburdened. We don't feel like we're getting our fair share. We're not exactly sure how, but we do understand that there are those in the legislature, in the industry, and those of us in community-based organizations, if you could go back a slide, are clearly understanding there's data. We are Black and brown, low income, moderate income households, customers have been for epochs subsidizing things, benefits that they never benefit from. And so what we want to make sure is that when there are policy changes that can make sure that low and moderate income people are benefiting from the programs that they're paying into, we're all working toward that. In the meantime, let's be fair to those who have been paying into systems that they can't afford and pick up the slack for what will result in there being life essential services from investor-owned utilities, which are enjoying a fixed profit, no risk profit, and a recoup of bad debt on the regular. Let's be fair to everyone. Equity is not a mood. It's not a program. It can be very well understood by looking at the numbers. And so we understand we've been overwhelmingly disenfranchised, and that the majority of prosperity benefits in the energy realm are not generally available to us. Vulnerable ratepayers need relief now and deserve it. Karen?
So next steps, HB 2172. Last week we had a hearing before the House Public Utilities Committee. We were encouraged by it. The chairman of the committee, after all of the testimony was heard, told the utilities, come to the negotiating tables with advocates and come to some sort of understanding or agreement, and work together to try and produce legislation that addresses these critical affordability and credit and collections issues. So we're encouraged by that. And we are hoping and that in the next weeks to come, that the utilities will come to the table and do just that. The legislative session ends May 19th. And so we're asking anyone who can to call your legislator and urge them to vote yes on HB 2172.
Thank you. I know we've only got a few minutes left for questions. Jen, maybe you want to jump in here?
Why don't I facilitate some questions here? And I'm going to put the CLE link in the chat after I ask the question. So don't forget, if you want that CLE, to put it in. There were a few questions about the ranking, and one was, does the risk ranking take into account race, and whether are there grounds for fighting the ranking?
So we're told that that race does not enter into it, but the impact is that what enters into it. For example, we know it's things like late fees, security deposits, disconnection notices, disconnections, when the last time a person paid was, how long they've been at their residence or been a customer. Those are the inputs to this black box algorithm computation. We don't know what the weightings are. We don't know how they, mix it in the blender to come up with and give each of us a number. And so, but what we do know is that the impact, assuming that they use these risk ranking, which they said they do, to determine how quickly someone is disconnected, we do know that there is a disparate impact on non-white households.
Thanks. So there was this is a more detailed one. Questions for both presenters. What would the transition of utility regulators to shift compensating utilities from cost to service, where they can get a guaranteed return on equity on whatever they spend, performance system based on outcomes, with a reduced or no guaranteed ROE? What would that impact be? If you put utility shareholders at risk?
So that it sounds like, Mark, you're talking about a performance-based rate, which is what the electric utilities will be regulated by in the coming 4 years. Those cases are being litigated now. I would say, but the actual return on equity, the profit level will be set by the commission. Both Ameren and ComEd have asked for profit levels over 10%, which, you know, when was the last time you heard about an investment earning 10%? We think that's obviously excessive, and that will be challenged in the cases by parties. But
let me just here and say something about that relativity. When profits are fixed and guaranteed, and when rates are continually escalating far beyond income and far beyond program dollars, to have this level of arrearage accumulating and the threats of shutoff being what they are, it's too much. Something's got to give. And we're not begrudging anybody in America the chance to make a fair profit, but we're saying this is an investor-owned utility in a regulated franchise monopoly. There's a duty to serve everyone, health and safety standards, and we're not there yet. We've got there far beyond the American standard of 6% of household income for light and heat. We're not there yet. The programs that are currently being offered by our colleagues at the utilities are not able to produce affordability. This is the way, together at the table working on 2172, that we can begin to move toward affordability.
Awesome. Well, I think we've hit the end. There's a couple of suggestions in the chat, so I'll save some of those for Karen and Naomi. Also a request for a fact sheet that I'm sure we will get over as we continue to discuss this issue, not only now, but in the future. So I just want to send so much gratitude to Naomi and Karen for this presentation. I know it took a lot of work. We are going to have this available on YouTube probably on Monday. I have an amazing staff that'll get it up. And we'll make
you do have an amazing staff.
They're so good. And I see Ariel on here, who I know did a lot of work with all of you to do some drafting. Love her.
Very much so.
Sorry if I'm missing some other staff, but I know Ariel really worked on this. So I'll make sure that this information and the PowerPoint and the handouts go out to the presenters. And, you know, like I said, if you want CLE, make sure you give me your ARDC number in the link. But thank you all for attending. And our next one, I know we're working on one at the end of April that's going to be about some of the water issues that are going on in Illinois prisons right now. We have a few attorneys that are going to present on that. It's going to be a really interesting piece on the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and how it relates to our corrections facilities. So that one will be really interesting. But thank you so much to everybody for being on this and getting free CLE with IEC. And I guess finally, if there's ever something, I see a lot of attorneys on here. If you ever want to present on something, let me know and we will hook you up. So thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks,
Thank you, Jen.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.